Welcome to Monday. All right, back to the Gilded Age we go. Why is it called the Gilded Age? Because it was a time of great prosperity. You would call it the Golden Age, except there was so much corruption. See what I'm saying, McKenna? Instead of the Golden Age of American prosperity, it was gilded. It was like, was this really a great time for all Americans, or were those captains of industry robber barons? In your mind, hopefully you are sorting out for your own knowledge, your own ideas on how good or bad these captains of industry were. All right, remember this. There's a list. Usually when there's a list, those things are on tests, right? What are the reasons behind the rise of industrialism in America? Why did America in the late 1800s become such a dominant economic power? Not only did we prosper here, but we are becoming a world economic power in the late 1800s. Well, yes, there was that mini baby boom. There was more people on top of that coming to America from Europe. On top of that, the people that were in America kept migrating to the West. So what did that mean? More production of food. What does that mean? Well, that production of food is going to make it back to the East because of the railroad development. Also, the government saying, hey, we're going to protect American companies by putting high tariffs. Does everybody understand what tariffs are? If we raise the tariff on goods coming from other countries, then people are going to buy our products because they're cheaper. They're less expensive, not cheaper. Because they could be made better and yet less expensive. Make sense? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, depends. Because if we make our tariffs high, Dina, and Dina's the leader of Germany, she might say, oh, America's going to raise their tariffs on goods coming, we're exporting over there. Well, then we're going to raise our tariffs too. So now Americans aren't going to be able to sell their stuff to Germany because the people in Germany are going to buy the German stuff, right? You with me? So it's constant balance. It's a constant figuring out as leaders of government how high the tariffs should be. Because at this time in America, we need to lose. Yes. At this time in America, tariffs were good. Why? The market was being flooded with people. You with me? Now we live in a world of 7.8 billion, and America's only got 330 million of those. Remember, in your mind, you might think million, billion, but also in your brain, you're like, I know the difference between a million and a billion. It's more than just two words. It's a big difference, right? So are really high tariffs good for American companies now? Can American companies really thrive and prosper if the only market is other Americans? Or do American companies need to sell to the 7.8 billion people out there? With me? Are you getting it? This is not economics, it's history, but everything goes. Jaden has figured out, she's only a freshman, she's like, wait, all the subjects eventually come together. She figured it out yesterday. They all come together. Even English and math. In the end, go with history and economics. We went through all these captains from Vanderbilt and the railroads to Carnegie and steel, to Rockefeller and oil, to J.P. Morgan. What was his industry? Not an individual product. Yep, parity, money, all of it, right? A financier. And we learned that he was responsible for the Titanic, and because of his savage wealth, he might have even been responsible for 2 world wars. Okay. They didn't actually say that, but they wanted to make sure we knew that his family profited from those 2 world wars by selling bonds. By the way, does that make him evil?
Nope.
No, serious question, because that will be used by people that are well, let's face it, there's people out there today that are anti-American that will be used by people that are anti-capitalism, anti-American free market system of capitalism, that will say the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan and people like that only made it because they, on the backs of other people, and J.P. Morgan's family, like, financed 2 world wars. Okay, so did the world wars happen and J.P. Morgan's family said, hey, they're at war, we might as well make money on it? Or did the wars happen because they instigated it? You have to go a long way to say that the only reason we had wars is so J.P. Morgan can profit. But you see, it depends on how it's taught, right? That J.P. Morgan is obviously a bad guy, a robber baron, to the point that he profited off of 2 world wars. And then, I remember the big thing with Rockefeller was the development of these, which we'll get into today, I hope. I don't talk so much. You guys talked about Buchanan, or James Buchanan Duke, right? The Duke of the South that realized that what was going on in the North, all the industry that they had, the South's got to move away from being strictly agrarian. We cannot just depend on growing our crops. Oh, and by the way, why are we growing cotton, sending it to the North to get turned into products, and then buying them back? We need textile mills in the South. Also, he was big in bringing hydroelectric power to the South, and tobacco. If you had me in 5th grade, you know the tobacco story. When I was 16, I was helping a guy that was big in baseball in Newtonian. He said he wanted me to help the coach, so I go out to first base, coach first base, but he said, whoa, wait a minute, if you're gonna coach, remember this, Elise? If you're gonna coach, you gotta have this. And he hands me a thing of, some of you may have never seen this. Do you know what leaf tobacco is? Like, they sell it in a pouch, and they take it out. Anybody not know what I'm talking about? It's not the snuff that they put here in the little can. You ever see guys with that ring in their pocket because they carry that can of Copenhagen or whatever everywhere? It's the whole leaf. And he said, if you're gonna coach, you got to chew tobacco, because he was old school, right? You remember me telling you what happened? I ended up in the field throwing up because within 5 minutes I looked up. I'm supposed to be coaching first, Ben, and he says, if you're gonna coach, you gotta do this. So I'm like, what? So I put it in there, and I look up, and the clouds are spinning. And I had to call timeout. I had to run into the woods and heave because I made me so sick. What's I'm thankful for? Because guess what I never did again? Tobacco. Yes.
Dave's restaurant.
Yeah. Did I just make you sick?
What? Yeah. Just started to
That's
throw up.
fine. You're like, okay, tobacco made a comeback. Why? Remember why, Jake? You had all those northern soldiers that were down there during the war, and they got introduced to this thing called tobacco, and they kind of liked it. Maybe the Lord wasn't as gracious to them, and they didn't get as sick. So they liked tobacco, smoking it, chewing it, whatever. And the market in the North increased greatly for tobacco. And Duke, another one of those bad guys, right, took advantage, selling tobacco to all those people and the health risks that were involved with his American tobacco company.
Well, people who asked for the tobacco.
Right. Not their fault, it's his. How far did we get with this? I know we talked about the democratization and the fact that these factories that were mass producing clothing made it so, hey, I can't tell if that person's rich or not. We go to the market, everybody's kind of dressed the same. That was a good thing. Communications with the roller press. And this is where we left off, right? AT&T. We didn't watch, or we didn't do Edison, right?
No.
With communications, you had the typewriter, which is an obvious thing, right? And then you had the mass roller, or the roller press, which I don't know, did y'all catch what was happening there? Instead of having to press down on this typeset and then bring it up and take the paper out, now you had a roller that would roll the image onto the paper, and it just continuously happened. Now you can get, well, I don't know, Instead of, you could probably get 10 times as many or more newspapers produced or other publications produced as compared to the old press that they would press down, have to lift the press, take it out, hang it up. They probably still had to hang them up after the roller, but that was very time consuming the way they used to do it. Alexander Graham Bell and AT&T. I think that's where we left off with Caleb and Jake making fun of my cricket phone, which is AT&T lines. So I make fun of them because they're paying more for the name. Yep, same line, same service. 4 phones, $110. Anyway, electrical power. Thomas Alva Edison. You ever notice how some people, you always conclude the middle name? Some presidents, you always have to say the middle initial, right? Like, nobody says Ronald W. Reagan. They say Ronald Reagan. But you always have to say James A. Garfield.
George W.
Or George, well, that's at least to distinguish between HW, yeah. But, like, you don't say William J. Schwinn. You say, really, it kind of ended. Yeah, he had, it wasn't sepsis, I hope. It was just infection. Supposedly not COVID. Mr. Schwindeman just informed me that Colin Powell died. Interestingly, well, I guess we won't go there. He died of the virus, but he was full of vaccine. But I'm not going there. We're moving on. Moving on. Colin Powell was a part of the George W. Bush administration. He became very prominent in the early 2000s. Anyway, he passed away today from the virus. He was fully vaccinated. That's all I have to say about that. All right, Thomas Alva Edison, the most prolific inventor, of course. Most of you might know that Edison's involvement with the incandescent light bulb, but are you aware about the phonograph, motion pictures, and many other things? Those are the 3 big ones. September 4th, 1882, he finally perfects this incandescent light bulb. So remember they talked about how Rockefeller was saying, hey, nobody was mad when there were lamps in everybody's houses, right? So it wasn't long after that Edison comes up with that incandescent bulb that's going to make the kerosene obsolete anyway, eventually. Any questions so far? Maybe names you've heard of before, like you noticed that your refrigerator is a Westinghouse, or you've heard the name Tesla these days, right? With the car. But the original Westinghouse and Tesla, and their advancements in electrical energy, generators and transformers. This is all happening in the late 1800s. Are you getting it? When did all of this happen? You're sitting here in America in 2021 enjoying all of the fruits of what was started in the late 1800s. All of these innovations and inventions that led to what we enjoy today. Like, I'm starting to feel a little toasty. So I can walk over here and notice that the air is not on right now. So if you complain when you come in that it's too chilly, I kind of like it a little bit of a, I don't like it being too hot because then when Elise gets tired, I start to see her do this when it's hot. Trying to stay awake. You should see some of y'all from a teacher perspective sometimes. Everybody good? No? Got it?
I'm good. I'm good.
Did anybody never hear of Westinghouse before today? Like there's no appliances you ever heard of in your house, Westinghouse? Aren't they really big in like mixers and stuff? Blenders? I don't know. I got a picture of that in my when I was a kid. Of course, I was a kid way before you.
That's true.
Okay, it's always the politics. It's all politics. You ever hear that said? Somebody's talking about anything, oh, it's all politics. Baseball down at Scene Park, it's all politics. The baseball team at the local high school, it's all politics. Who's gonna be the quarterback? It's all politics. Yeah. Yeah. What about the politics of the Gilded Age? Well, there's 4 major issues going on in America. Now that we're done with all that fun stuff and all those industries and inventions, now we gotta talk about the dirty stuff, politics. Well, believe it or not, way back then, 130 years ago, these were issues and they continue to be issues. You know why, John? You know why there's still issues? Because we're people, we're fallen creatures, right? We are sinful people. So we'll keep trying. We'll keep trying to reform things and get corruption out of politics, but I'm not sure there's really any hope for that in a fallen world. That's why we look forward to Christ's return so much, right? Civil service reform. Okay, you might have written this down, but now it's incumbent on someone out there to save the rest of the class and tell them what is civil service. David, you kind of have that look like you kind of are formulating an answer, but you're not real sure. So let me know when you're sure by putting your hand up. What is civil service? Have you heard that term before?
Yes.
Okay, what is it?
Heard it.
Can you name someone that works in the civil service? Okay, before you do that, let me help you out. Do you know what service means? Do you know what military service is? If I'm in the Army, what kind of service am I doing for my country? Military? Military service. What is civil service then? Come on, somebody. Service has to do with serving. A soldier is serving his country or her country in the military service. What's civil service? And what might your job be if you were considered a civil servant? Jaden's halfway got the hands up.
Like jobs in the community, like teaching,
Like what?
like teaching or political jobs or
Okay, teaching's not usually included, although you could kind of make a case for that. How about the post office? U.S. Post
like
Office,
construction.
policeman, not construction, not teaching and construction, but like when you say working for the community, yes, all those people do, but this is like working in the administration of the community. So the U.S. Post Office, if you wanted to get a job to be in the post office, you would have to take what's called a civil service test. You have to take that test if you want to be a policeman, a fireman, post office. If you wanted to work in any sector of the government, Columbus or Washington, D.C., you are a civil servant. You're serving your country as a civilian. What do they call a person that's not in the military? Okay, if you're in the military and you retire, you're no longer in the military, you're just a civilian now, right? So civil service, people that serve but not in the military, that help to run the government. Yeah.
What a lawyer.
No. So lawyers and teachers and construction workers, no. People that literally get paid by the government to administrate the government. How's that? Is that a better way of saying it? People that get paid by the taxpayers to administrate the government. That's why I said teachers, someone might technically say they are because they are paid by taxpayers, but they're not working, they shouldn't be working for the government. I left that phrase up there, de facto. They shouldn't be working for the government. Legally, they're not working for the government, but in fact, some of us really are. All right. So there's civil service reform, there's corruption, yes, that still needs to be attacked. We talked about that with President Grant. And then you've got those tariffs and those trusts that Rockefeller made so, yeah, prominent.
Yeah, either.
Yes. All right. Have you ever heard the phrase, to the victor goes the spoils? Somebody heard that over here. To the victor goes the spoils. In other words, you get the, like, or if you're a kid, you're spoiled because you get everything, right? If someone accuses a kid of being spoiled, if they're saying that they get everything, right? So the spoils is kind of what you get. It's like the, I don't know, it's almost like it's handed to you. You didn't really earn it, right? A spoiled kid gets whatever she wants, even though she doesn't behave. She doesn't do what she's supposed to do. She's just spoiled because she didn't really earn it. And to the victor go the spoils. You didn't make the stuff, but you get it. They're the ones that made it, did all the hard work, but you get it because you beat them at war. Okay, so what does that do with politics? What it has to do with politics is this. You know what the word spoils means now. The spoil system was it was not by law, it was just in fact the way things were going. Everybody getting what that de facto means? De jure means by law. De facto means it's just how it was. There was no law that said when President Grant became president that he had to give his best friend a place in his cabinet. Of course not. But in fact, that's what happens a lot in politics. You with me? What happens in politics a lot, still 130 years after this, is that people get elected and then they give their friends positions. Well, they were trying to stamp that out 130 years ago. And we're still dealing with it. We still deal with the fact that people get elected and then they don't pick the most deserving, spoiled, right? People that deserve it, they pick people just to give it to them. So they get that position because they're spoiled. They didn't do anything to earn it. So the spoil system was replacing civil servants with their own supporters. And President Grant, if you remember, no one was basically accusing him of being dishonest. They accused him of being like naive. Like, Mr. President, you were such a great field general, but you just can't put people in positions in the government. They don't know what they're doing. You're just giving them that job out of loyalty to them. So it was like he was loyal to a fault. Does that make sense? He wasn't understanding how bad that was for the government to put people in there just because they were loyal to him. He was loyal to them. Now, so here's what happens. I get elected. I go into office. There's people that have been working in that, doing all the paperwork for years. And I decide, nope, you're out. I'm bringing Jake in. Wait, what's Jake's qualifications? I don't know. I think he'll do a good job. Wait, this person's been doing the job for years and they're very qualified. They're doing good. Nope, they're out. Jake's in. Because I like him. I think he'll be loyal to me. That's the spoil system. President Hayes, what was his first name? Rutherford. What was his middle initial? Yeah, Rutherford B. Hayes. He was elected as a reformer. What's reform mean? Change. We're going to change this. President Grant, we all loved him, great war hero. He just didn't get it. We got to change this system of spoils. And another thing that President Hayes did, remember we talked about Boss Tweed? You guys remember Boss Tweed?
Yeah.
He was the head of that Democrat machine in New York. Well, guess what? There was a guy named Roscoe Conkling. That's not as prominent as a name, is it?
No.
Most kids will not remember Roscoe Conkling like they remember Boss Tweed. It's just got that memorable name, right? plus, boss. Roscoe Conkling was the head of not the Democrat machine, but he was the head of the Republican quote unquote machine. And what they were into was controlling the tariffs. So here's how a tariff works. Your ship comes into port in New York Harbor. Before you take that product off the ship, you're bringing it over from Great Britain or England or France, and you want to sell that in America, you're going to pay a tax. You're going to pay a tariff to be able to sell your product in our country. Well, Roscoe Conkling and his people got control of the customs office. That's another weird term, customs. You might not understand what it means, but if you try to cross a border, there's a customs. It's called customs, and you have to show them your ID. Like these days, to go to even Canada, to go see Niagara Falls, you gotta have a passport. It's crazy. It used to be nice and easy. Americans just drove across the border to the Canadian side of the falls. Anyway, that's called customs you have to pass through. And they check your luggage and all that stuff. The Republican machine run by Conkling had control of that. And just like Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall, they would be skimming off the top. All the money that was supposed to be going to the government for tariffs, they would take their share. And Hayes, being a Republican, took them down. That means a lot of Republicans are not going to like Ruby Hayes. And sadly, a lot of times, if you do the right thing in politics, a lot of people don't like it. So we end up with bad politicians because they aren't as disliked because they're helping so many people within politics that we might not know about. That was what was going on with Conkling. Hayes took him down. And that brings us to the election of 1880. James A. Garfield from Ohio. Right?
Yeah.
You knew that? Garfield High School? One in Cleveland, Akron. Never heard of it? James A. Garfield. A lot of you just wrote half-breed as if like you think it's talking about like he was half white, half black, half white, half Indian. Well, then what are you thinking? Because usually when you hear the term half-breed, that means that it's a mixed race, right? That's not what half-breed means. This is a political term. He is running with Chester A. Arthur. And that's going to be his vice president candidate because in the Republican Party, there was a rift. There was division within the party. You had your group called the half-breeds, and you had your group called the stalwarts. Jake, what's a stalwart? When I say the word stalwart, what are you thinking? Just give me an adjective. I say stalwart, first adjective comes in your mind. Anybody, say it out loud. Stalwart. Give me an adjective. What? Strong. Stalwart. A stalwart is someone that is there's going to be strong. What's the word? Stubborn. Not moved. He was a stalwart offensive tackle throughout his career. He was strong, protecting his quarterback. A stalwart in the Republicans back then was one that was going to stay strong and loyal to the Republican Party. A half-breed was someone who would be like, okay, let's compare it to today. We want to take history and always compare it to today, right? It's cyclical. It happens over and over again. Because those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Today, it's who we would call rhinos. Have you ever heard the term rhino? You guys follow politics enough to know what a rhino is? Nobody? Wow. R-I-N-O. Republican, N-I, name, N-O only. A rhino in today's politics is someone that says they're Republican, but they seem to be going along with what the Democrats are doing. So then the other Republicans call them rhinos. Back then, they would have called them a half-breed. Like, you say you're Republican, but you sure seem to be going along with things that the other side's saying Republicans are going wrong. Or other people, instead of calling them rhinos, would call them moderates. You know what that term means, right? They're not like extreme on one side or the other. So they call them half-breeds. So in the Republican Party, you had Garfield from Ohio, who was considered more moderate, not as staunchly or stalwart Republican. Is it making sense now? Where today we would call the Republicans like real conservatives compared to those rhinos. Arthur was a stalwart. So what the Republicans did, they said, okay, we have to beat the Democrats. How are we going to do it? We'll put Garfield up as the president. He's from Ohio. Ohio is a very large state back then, growing. He's going to get a lot of electoral votes. Arthur's from New York. And even though he's a stalwart and we're more moderate, we want him on the ticket because of New York. That's a lot of electoral votes. So they put one of each so that they would please both parts of their party. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Now, they were running against Winfield Hancock, a Democrat. And this Democrat was a Union general in the war and a very popular man. They barely beat Hancock in the popular vote. But remember how it works? It's not the popular vote, it's the electoral vote. And since they had New York and Ohio, they had a major advantage. It'd be like someone from California today. You get California, you've got over a fifth of the votes, you've got about a fifth of the votes you need to be president in just one state. So even though the vote was very close, they won easily in the electoral. So does anybody know what happened to Garfield? You're all from Ohio. Somewhere along the line, you all had Ohio history. What happened to Garfield? Garfield starts a trend. You know, if something just happens once, if something just happens once, it's not a trend. If it happens twice, it's still not really a trend. But if it happens over and over again, then it becomes a trend. Anybody remember the zero factor? Fifth grade. The zero factor. Every president that was elected in a year that ends with zero had the same thing happen to him all the way to 2000. They either died in office or they were, when it comes to Reagan, there was an attempt to assassinate him. Garfield was assassinated. He got elected in November of 1880. He didn't make it through the summer of 1881. Garfield is shot in Washington, D.C. on July 2nd. He suffers. I've never really read about it. Someday I'm interested. I don't really want to read it, but how awful his life must have been. How much he must have suffered all through July and August and into the middle of September. I forget the exact date in September, but for 2 to 3 months, how he must have suffered. Think back then what medicine was like, not like today, right? How much he must have suffered from the time he was shot till he died in September. But of course, if Garfield is shot, then who becomes president? Chester Arthur, who's still a Republican, but he's more of a stalwart. What we would say today is more conservative, more Republican than Garfield. But here's what happens with Chester Arthur. When he becomes the 21st president of the United States, him and Congress working together because what's the big issue? Civil service reform and corruption, right? We're trying to get rid of this stuff in politics. They create a civil service commission. Congress makes a law. Instead of these presidents being able to come in, or any leader in the country, being able to come in and say, you're out, my friend's in. Now they create this civil service commission, it's still in place today, where these people are in charge of the hiring and firing. A president just can't come in. Like, remember how we said that the president can have a Secretary of Defense that he wants? But when it comes to those other jobs, those civil service jobs, the bureaucracy, this was set up to keep the spoils out. It doesn't mean that the country was running better necessarily, because now what we've created is a bureaucracy where we have professional bureaucrats that are running the country. We didn't even elect them. We don't even know who they are. There are some that might say, and I guess that's the last note for the day. So as you're wrapping up, there are some that say that it almost doesn't matter who gets elected in America, because the people that are working at the Pentagon and at the White House and at the Capitol building, that are professional workers in government, they're running the show. Does that make sense? So when you hear terms like draining the swamp, it doesn't mean that you're getting rid of particular politicians. We've got a whole bureaucracy full of people that are in government jobs, and they're kind of controlling the government. Does that make sense, Noah? You sure? Like, you think who gets elected is very important, which it is. But that one person gets elected to represent this area. Bill Johnson is our congressional representative for this area, okay? He goes to Washington. He goes to that office, and there's already dozens of people working in his office building on behalf of we, the people that he serves. Things are already kind of in place. How much work would it be for him to go in there and really change everything? Because you can change policy, but you can't change people. Because it's civil service. I hope you are. I hope you're listening. What do you think, John?
At least they're honest.
Yeah, Jonathan, we'll pick up there tomorrow. Starting back with Abraham Lincoln, every president that got elected that ended with zero either got killed or died in office.
Well, that's interesting.
All the way up to
It's a progression.
Yep.
Politics of the Gilded Age. Was the
Oh,
God,
this is that?
1881.
Ooh.
I like slavery.
What?
It was like a season. But it has, why does it have to?
Right. Like today, whether it was Pittsburgh, I know.
Oh, yeah, that's like people from my class. There's not many people
Back then, they would say that. Today, we would say, fine, because you're a Republican, but you're acting like
Are you okay?
Of course, it was meant to be an insult. You know what I'm saying? Like, they would mean it as, that used to be an insult to say someone was dead. They would mean it as an insult. But they
Oh, that's really scary.
You know, somebody would say, you share.
Oh my God.
I am.
Hey, what's happening?
Yeah.
I think it was Taylor, you're a trail.
You must get Professor Lopez. How speak of Brett. I speak Brett. I speak Brett.